Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for May 28th, 2021. I'm going to focus on one topic today, which is the upcoming summit on June 16th between President Joe Biden of the United States and President Vladimir Putin of Russia. There were a number of questions sent to me over the last couple of days about this, mostly of the sort, can Biden be trusted to negotiate in good faith? Is there a possibility that there could be a decent outcome from the summit? Is Russia an honest party in the negotiations? A lot of skepticism from people, and it's well deserved. If you've looked at the period of the last 20 years, what we see is that the United States has been unleashed on a course of war. And it's more than 20 years. It actually goes back to the mid-1980s when the Brzezinski doctrine, the arc of crisis, which is a British geopolitical doctrine, was employed against the Soviet Union, beginning with U.S. aid to the Afghan mujahideen in Afghanistan, who were fighting against the Russian occupation. Those forces then became the bin Laden networks of al-Qaeda. They also included the Taliban. And from that time to the present, we've had a series of wars. The invasion of Iraq in the Gulf War of 1991 by George H.W. Bush, where he prominently proclaimed the emergence of a new world economic order as a result of U.S. military crushing of the Iraqi forces. We had the 9/11, which brought with it both the consolidation of a security state and the Patriot Act. At the same time, the endless wars, beginning with the attack on Afghanistan and then Iraq, continuing with the regime change in Libya, in which the president of that country was murdered, the effort on behalf of the radical Islamic factions in Syria to overthrow the government of President Assad of Syria, the constant barrage against Iran. What we're seeing is a U.S. policy which has been what Lyndon LaRouche once characterized as an American dumb giant on a British leash. And what's it backing? Well, we have the most recent cogent expression of this in the so-called rules-based order, which was popularized by Secretary of State Pompeo, the leading war hawk, who attempted to undo anything President Trump tried to accomplish with ending the never-ending wars. If you think about it, Trump did not initiate a new war, but under Pompeo, there was a constant escalation, especially against Russia and China, but including the sanctions against, the threatened sanctions against Yemen, the Caesar sanctions against Syria. When the attempt to overthrow the Assad government through supporting terrorists didn't work, they implemented crippling sanctions to starve the Syrian people, to convince them that they had to overturn the government there. This is a human rights violation of the worst sort. And so the United States has been on a course to imposing its will as a unilateral force in the world on a doctrine drafted by the City of London in collaboration with the military-industrial complex in the United States. That's why we have tension in the world. What have the Russians done? They responded in Ukraine, to the overthrow of an elected government by a regime change coup carried out under the direction of then Vice President Biden, operating under President Obama, working together with Nazi militia and George Soros to bring in a corrupt regime which has dramatically worsened the situation in Ukraine, threatened war with the Russian-speaking people of the eastern provinces. And when a so-called annexation was carried out of Crimea by a vote, an overwhelming democratic vote, this made Russia the leading cause of danger in Ukraine and the initiation of new sanctions and so on. So what the Russians have done primarily is to react to Western provocations. The idea that Russia intervened in the U.S. election in 2016 is a lie, a provable lie. With all the money spent and all the time spent and all the allegations against Putin and Trump from the Mueller report, there was no evidence of Russian collusion with Trump to win the election for him. Furthermore, there's not even evidence that there was a Russian hacking, which was the initial charge that brought about the whole investigation. Now, we had a promise from President Trump to drain the swamp and get to the bottom of this. But by the end of his presidency, that swamp was making U.S. policy. It turned him against his friend Xi Jinping. And even though he kept repeating the phrase that he wanted peaceful cooperation with Russia, we had a series of sanctions against Russia carried out by the Trump administration. Now, these have been built upon by the Biden administration. And so we've seen a worsening of relationships, or of a relationship, and a move toward potential war, especially several months ago with the situation in Ukraine, which was provoked by what? By the president of Ukraine saying that they intend to take back Crimea. We have the latest charges that Russia intervened in the 2020 election. No evidence that Russia was behind the hacking of the Colonial Pipeline and the Solar Winds Company. That Russia was supporting Belarus in bringing down a plane which had a dissident on it, a dissident who's part of the regime change operation run by the same networks of London and Wall Street. And by the way, who received training with the Azov Battalion, the Nazi brigade embedded in the Ukrainian security forces. So all of this points toward heightened confrontation, which we've had, a worsening of relations. However, we have a second factor here, which is a financial system which is extremely fragile, which has been pushed or is being pushed by the financial oligarchy toward what they call a great reset, a new financial bubble, a green financial bubble, which will not be accepted by Russia and China. The so-called rules-based order means that every nation must give up its sovereignty to submit itself to this new rules-based order. But this is not an order defined by a natural law or international law, but by arbitrary declarations from the City of London and Wall Street and by their puppets in the European Union. And this was behind the Nord Stream 2 sanctions and so on. So what will create a change? Well, the change is going to have to occur because this rules-based order is collapsing. And it's collapsing because it's based on fraudulent ideas, narratives, lies, economic policies which can't succeed. You're not going to bail out the unbelievable levels of debt, which are being increased every single day by the volume of liquidity pumping by central banks. You're not going to solve that by creating a new bubble. You have to go to a new paradigm, which is what Helga Zepp-LaRouche and the Schiller Institute has been calling for a long time. So for those of you who say you're skeptical that there'll be a change, well, the skepticism may be legitimate, but if we don't have a change, we're going to have a nuclear war. Where will the change come from? Well, I think the fact that Russia and China are forming a new alliance, a stronger alliance, which will not be broken, no matter what the Anglo-Americans attempt to do, is encouraging other countries to join, whether it's in terms of the sharing of vaccine, whether it's building new infrastructure. All of these things are coming from China and to some extent from Russia, and not from the United States. So the United States is stuck under this British framework, which is making us an enemy to the rest of the world. Now, the American people know that there's something wrong with our system. That's why Trump was elected, but he didn't fix it. And rather than blaming him, blame the inability of the population to mobilize to back him fully. there was a mobilization. It was called an election, and Trump got 75 million votes and probably was reelected. But he didn't end up in office. The coup succeeded, and we're now in a situation where the world is headed toward war or towards a new paradigm. Now, what we're proposing is that new paradigm would be based on cooperation between the United States, Russia, and China, going back to the principles at the end of World War II, based on pursuing the common aims of mankind. Is that a possibility for the United States? Well, not under the direction of the City of London. And unfortunately, Secretary of State Blinken was just in London, where he proclaimed his enduring commitment to the so-called special relationship by which the British manipulate and dominate U.S. policy. That must change. Change is going to be forced upon us because the rest of the world won't submit. And the question then is, will the American public support a continuation of wars and austerity to benefit the 1% of the so-called elite who control the policy? Or will we find the means by which we can overturn this geopolitical doctrine and the neoliberal policy and replace it with an American system approach? That's the fight that we're in. And I'd urge every one of you to join with us, with the LaRouche Organization, with the Schiller Institute, to make sure that we win this fight. Educate yourself. Go to our website. Look at the videos. Look at the daily updates. Look at the articles we're posting. We're providing the intelligence that's needed to win this fight. And the question then is, can we get it out to enough people in a timely manner? Help us do that. Become members of the Schiller Institute. Circulate our literature. Share these videos. And let's make sure that we can have this great transformation, not of Klaus Schwab and the Davos billionaires, into a great reset, which is a central banker's dictatorship imposing a genocidal Green New Deal. Instead, that we have a transformation along the lines of a common fight for the common aims of mankind, a collaboration of all nations. That's the only way to approach this situation today. So thanks for joining me in the U.S. Have a good Memorial Day weekend, and I'll see you again on Monday.